Well, psychology is a very vast subject. Psychology started in the West as trying to understand what is called the psyche, the study of the psyche. And the psyche really refers to the soul, or even we talk about the mind. When the psychologists began to study the soul or the mind, they couldn't find it. The only thing that they could see was the body. They couldn't find the mind. And they couldn't find the soul. So ultimately, they had to define psychology as the study of human behavior. They could see the human being and the behavior of the human being. They couldn't find a soul or even a mind. So this is why they had to talk about the body and not about the mind. Psychology as a scientific study began with Sigmund Freud, who was a medical doctor who was wanting to treat psychological problems. So he realized that to study the mind, you had to use a different way of looking at things. That means the normal science that people were talking about was something that could be seen outside, which means as an objective experience, as an object. So when you look at things from that objective experience, what you can see is only the body. What you see, hear, smell, taste, touch. is the body, or what you call matter. And matter is something that occupies space and time. So these scientific subjects that we talk about, like physics, chemistry, biology, these things are objective studies, or the study of matter, study of things. But when we talk about the mind is a subjective experience, not an objective experience. So, because it is a subjective experience, you have to look at it from a subjective way. That means we have to look within, not outside. And that looking within is what is called introspection. So Sigmund Freud used introspection to study the mind, to look within. But those behaviorist psychologists who thought that psychology is the study of human behavior, they started criticizing Freud for using introspection. They said introspection is not scientific. To be scientific, it should be what we might call extrospection, looking outside. Now, so that is how Sigmund Freud started his psychology, through introspection. But later psychologists, they began to think that to be scientific you have to look outside, not inside. That was the behaviorists. But among the behaviorists, there was a collection of people who said, no, we have to study the mind, not just the body. So we have to use introspection. And that is how this thing called cognitive psychology came into being. But the cognitive psychologists had to use introspection. So, now if we compare this to the Buddhist way of thinking, when we speak about the Dhamma, there the Buddha speaks about Swakhato Bhagavata Dhammo, Sanditthiko, Akaliko, Ehipasiko. open-aiko. That word open-aiko means looking within or introspection. So the teachings of the Buddha is also introspective, looking within, not outside. So it is important to understand that even some of the things that the introspective psychologists like Sigmund Freud began to discover, the Buddha has been speaking about these things. So one very important thing to understand is that modern Buddhists, that means the Theravadins, the Mahayana and the Vajrayana, they have really missed the important points laid down by the Buddha in his original teachings. There, the Buddha spoke of three things when referring to the mind: Chitta, Mano and Vijnana. This Chitta, Mano and Vijnana is not the division that you get in what is called Abhidharma. Even the Abhidharma is not really the original teachings of the Buddha. It is a later made up psychology or philosophy. So the important thing is the Buddha used these three words, Chitta, Mano and Vijnana. And these are not separate entities, separate from the body. In other words, the Buddha didn't speak of a thing called mind as separate from the body. Although modern, even Abhidharma scholars and Buddhist philosophers talk about two things called mind and body. But the Buddha didn't speak of two things like that. And what he called Chitta, Mano and Vijnana are really activities of the body. The body, that activity, three different activities of the body. These three activities are really, in modern terminology, these are activities of the nervous system. Now we have a thing called a nervous system, and we have other systems like the circulatory system, digestive system, respiratory system in the body. But this nervous system, we have five senses. The body has five senses: the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the body. And these five senses can be stimulated by things happening in the environment. So the environment, activities in the environment stimulates the senses, and the senses react to the stimulus. And this reaction to the stimulus is what is called perception. Eye perception, ear perception, nose perception, tongue perception, body perception. These are perceptions. And perception is simply the activity of the sense organs. The eye sees light. The ear can only hear sounds. The nose can only smell smells, good or bad. And the tongue can taste pleasant and unpleasant tastes. And the body can feel the touch of pleasant and unpleasant experiences. So you see, that is perception. That is what is called vijnana. Vijnana. The word vijnana is today translated as consciousness, which I think is a bad translation. Vijnana is not consciousness. These words have been used without understanding what the Buddha is trying to say. This is the point. So what we really know is vijnana is perception. But whatever is perceived is carried to the brain by means of nerves going from the sense organ to the brain. The nerves are like telephone wires carrying messages. So what is seen is carried by the optic nerve to the brain. What is heard is carried by an auditory. What is smelt is carried by an olfactory nerves. Like that, different nerves carry messages from the sense organs to the brain. And in the brain, there is a part of the brain that begins to think. It's called the cerebrum or the cerebral cortex. And this part of the brain begins to think and reason out and give meaning to what was seen or heard or smelled or tasted or touched. It is by giving meaning in this way that you begin to become conscious of a world outside. So the real consciousness comes from this activity of the brain. And that is called cognition. So it is that cognitive process that really begins to know what was seen or heard or smelled, tasted, touched. And that is what the Buddha called mano. Mano is that cognitive process. Mano. And according to the meaning that is given, an emotion is aroused. The emotion that is aroused can come in the form of a desire for something or hatred of something or fear or even worry. These are emotions. And the emotion really is a disturbance of the body. Because when an emotion is aroused, a message goes from the brain to the glands, and the glands secrete hormones, and the hormones are carried by the blood to the whole body. And therefore changes take place in the activities of the body. And that change is what we call the emotion. And that change is not the normal activity of the body, but a special activity for that particular situation. So it is really a disturbance of the body. And if this disturbance continues for a long time, it can turn into a sickness in the body. And this is what today the psychologists call stress. Stress is this disturbance created by the emotional arousal or excitement. And this is what the Buddha referred to as dukkha, which is commonly translated as suffering. Now these things are recognized today by the modern psychologists. And this emotional disturbance not only affects the healthy running of the body, that emotional excitement is also expressed in action. And when it is expressed in action, it can affect other people. If you are angry and if you begin to act in the angry way, it can harm other people, and then other people will begin to harm you. And there can be a problem. That is the consequence of this bad behavior. So all that is recognized in Buddhism as karma, what is normally called karma or karma, is simply this bad behavior that comes up from the emotion. So the modern psychologists are also trying to find a way of overcoming this disturbance. How to gain control over the emotions. And the Buddha also pointed out the way to get rid of these emotions. This is the main teaching of the Buddha. Which comes in the form of 3 steps: Sila, Samadhi and Panya. Sila refers to the control of behavior, and Samadhi refers to the control of the emotional disturbance and calming the mind, the tranquility of the mind. And Panya refers to control in the thinking part, which is done by the brain in interpreting the circumstances. It is the interpretation of the brain that leads to the emotional excitement. So if we can gain control over the interpretation, then the problem is solved. That is the meaning of Vipassana Bhavana. What is today called Vipassana meditation is really learning to gain control over the thinking part. Today, the modern psychologists use the term cognition to refer to the thinking part, and affection to refer to the emotional part. Sigmund Freud used the word ego to refer to the thinking part, and id, id, to refer to the emotional part. He also used another term, superego. That superego refers to what is called the conscience. Conscience means, now when a child is born, at that moment the child's brain is not fully developed. It takes time for the brain to develop. The ability of the brain to think properly, at least to some extent, comes only when the child is about 7 years old. So you see, so before that, there must be what is called a babysitter to look after the child. And that babysitter will be all the time looking after the child to find out whether the child is doing something wrong. So it is the babysitter who will teach the child, don't touch the flame or don't touch a hot wire or don't put a nail into your mouth and that sort of thing, you see. So there are a list of do's and don'ts. And that list of do's and don'ts will remain in the mind even when the child grows up. So the child has learned not to do certain things and to do certain things. So when the child grows up and becomes an adult, still those rules of behavior remain in the mind. And if you do something wrong or against those rules, you begin to feel guilty. That feeling is what is called the conscience. And that conscience is what Freud called the superego. Because that begins to control our behavior because we feel guilty when we do something wrong. And Buddha also spoke about this. It was called Hiri-ottappa. The word Hiri-ottappa refers to that. The Hiri and the Ottappa really refers to Hiri is before doing a wrong thing. You are reluctant to do the wrong thing. That is Hiri. Ottappa means after doing the wrong thing, you begin to feel that you have done something wrong. Repentance. You repent. Hiri is, I call it reluctance and repentance. Before you do it, you are reluctant to do it. After doing it, you begin to repent. Oh, I have done something wrong. Now, that is what is called Hiri-ottappa, which is the same thing as the superego of Freud. So these things are very useful to understand so that we are able to gain control over these emotions and emotional behavior. Now, when an emotion is aroused, that emotion is expressed in action. The action can come in the form of speech or behavior, physical behavior. Like when you are angry, you might use bad words, or you might even go to fight and quarrel. So the important thing is that for the human being, has the ability to delay this expression and get sufficient time to decide whether to act in that emotional way or to act in a rational way. That ability is what is called willpower, and that is what the Buddha called Chetana. So the Buddha said, Chetana aham bhikkhave kammam vadami. What that means is, what is called karma is that decision. You can decide to act in the wrong way or in the right way, which is to act emotionally or to act rationally. So that is, the choice is done by the thinking part, not the emotional part. So it is the cognitive part that decides what to do. And so, in other words, it is possible for the human being to gain control over the emotions. But to do that, we have to become conscious of what is happening. Because these things normally happen quite unconsciously. Even when anger arises, it happens unconsciously. And it becomes difficult even to control these emotions because they are happening unconsciously. It is only by becoming conscious that it can be brought under control. And this is the meaning of what is called satipatthana. Satipatthana is to become conscious of what is going on. And that becoming conscious is done by introspection, looking within, not by looking outside. This is why satipatthana is really introspection, not just mindfulness. So, that path called the Noble Eightfold Path which I translate as the supernormal eightfold way. That is the way to gain fully in control of the emotional behavior. So, I think I have said enough about this. So, if you have any questions, you can ask.
What are the importance? What are the importance psychology in terms of Buddhist practices?
What are the
importance of psychology in terms of Buddhist practices?
Well, the only importance of psychology is to understand these things. That the modern psychologists are also aware of these things. And so, an understanding of these parts of the body or the mental functions in this way is the study of psychology. So these psychological discoveries today are quite in agreement with what the Buddha has been saying. But the Buddha has pointed out that the aim of the Buddha is not to bring abnormal people to a normal state, but to bring normal people to a supernormal state. Now, what that means is that modern psychotherapy is really aimed at helping abnormal people to get away from the abnormal suffering and to enter a state of normal unhappiness. The normal person is not a fully happy person, but these are normal states, and so the psychologist is quite satisfied with bringing the abnormal person to a normal state. But the Buddha is trying to bring the normal person's normal unhappiness to a supernormal happiness, so that the supernormal state is a happy state, free from the normal worries, anxieties of life. That is the difference. That is the meaning of Arya. Arya means supernormal. The normal person is called the Putujjana. Putujjana is the ordinary person. Arya is the supernormal person. The Sotapanna, the Saktagami, Anagami, Arya. These are supernormal states, going beyond the normal.
They say that a lot of books mention that Abhidhamma is philosophical and psychological of Buddhism. So, what Bhante view about that?
My viewpoint is that Abhidharma is not the teaching of the Buddha. It was something that was created by the Theravadis You know, after about 100 years after the passing away of the Buddha, a second council was held. It was at that second council that the Abhidharma came into being. Before that there was no Abhidharma. And it was at the second council that they created the Abhidharma. There was a reason for this. You see, that second council came into being because some monks at that time, they wanted to break the Vinaya rules or to make things easy for them. Because they were monks who came from other places who were not really interested in practicing the Dhamma the proper way. And they were mainly there for the benefits they get by being monks. So, the senior monks said, no, we can't change the rules. Then those monks said, well, we'll take a vote. And so they took a vote. And who won? Those who wanted to break the rules won. Because they were a majority. So when you take a vote, it is the majority that wins. So the senior monks were the Theras. And the Theras separated from the majority. And the majority, of course, they were called the Mahasangha. So there was a separation between the Theras and the Mahasanghikas. That is how the Mahasangha came. But of course, when this happened, there was a problem. The problem was the monks were depending on the laymen for the food, clothing, shelter and everything. And if the laymen become disappointed, then they won't give these things. So there was a clever monk among these people who wanted to break the rules. He said, don't worry, we'll give a good answer to the layman. So he got the layman together and said, these Theras, they want to practice the Vinaya rules for a purpose. What is the purpose? They want to become Arahants, that's why. We don't want to become Arahants. That's why we don't want to practice the Vinaya rules. Then what are we wanting? We want to become Buddhas. A Buddha is a greater person than Arahant. So, to become Buddhas, we only have to practice the paramitas. So we are going to practice the paramitas. the layman didn't know the difference between paramitas and Vinaya rules. They didn't realize that these people, if they can't practice the Vinaya rules, which is very simple compared to the paramitas, how can they practice paramitas if they can't practice Vinaya rules? They didn't think in that way. So they thought they are trying to become Buddhas. Let us support them. That's good. The Theravadis want to become Arahants. Becoming Buddha is better than becoming Arahant. So they supported. So there was a sutra where the Buddha says, in the future, my disciples, instead of talking about the higher teaching that I have been teaching, like sunyata, the higher teachings, they'll be talking about the lower teachings. So the Theras were talking about that. So these Mahasanghikas, they heard about this and said, no, it is the Theras who are following the lower teachings. We are talking about the higher teachings, like sunyata. So their main topic became sunyata. And they started talking about sunyata. But they couldn't explain the meaning of sunyata properly. They only used the word sunyata. And then the Theras, they started saying Theras are the people who are teaching the lower teaching. So the Theras started saying, no, we are not talking about the lower teachings. We are talking about the higher teachings. That is Abhidharma. Abhidharma is the higher teaching. And that is what we are talking about. What they talk about as sunyata is really anatta. And they started talking about anatta. That is how the Abhidharma started. Before that there was no such thing as Abhidharma. But in talking about Abhidharma, what they did was, they started dividing things. And that was the anatta. To talk about anatta is to keep on analyzing things. So they started analyzing by talking about what are the things that they used in the Abhidharma. Chitta, Chaitasika, Rupa and Nibbana. That is what the Abhidharma people started talking about. Chitta, Chaitasika, Rupa and Nibbana. There you don't get the Mano. There is no Mano there. And the Vijnana is also not there. They only have the word Chitta and then they have a thing called Chaitasika. Then they talk about Rupa and they talk about Nibbana. So this is why this is not the original teaching of the Buddha, because the original teaching was about something else. So there are a lot of differences in this way. Gradually, if you study the history of Buddhism, you begin to understand these things gradually.
Many have translated dukkha as suffering. But I still feel that the dukkha, the English translation of suffering is still not that accurate. What's Bhante's view about that?
Well, the Buddha used the word dukkha. I know there are some people who have said that suffering is not the right word, and even that Professor K. Jayatilaka, he is the one who started saying that dukkha means something different from suffering. What is the word that he used?
Unsatisfaction.
Huh?
Unsatisfactoriness.
Yeah. Unsatisfactoriness. Now, satisfactory means it satisfies the desire. So he looked at it as desire not being satisfied. So he used the word unsatisfactoriness. But that is not the real meaning of this dukkha. The way I understand it is, the Buddha was trying to point out a very important fact, which is even today spoken of by this school of philosophy called existential philosophy. The existential philosophers pointed out that out of all the animals living in the world, the human being as an animal is the only animal who is aware of his own existence. And he is also aware that he is going to die. That creates fears, worries, anxieties, and that was described as fear and trembling. That fear and trembling was the suffering that the Buddha saw when he saw an old person, a sick person, and a dead person. Because he was brought up in the lap of luxury. At that time, they didn't have air conditioning or television or radios or any of those things. But all that was provided in a different way because his father was rich enough to build 3 high-rise buildings at that time, 7-story mansion, and made in such a way that he'll be protected from the 3 seasons, the hot season, the cold season and the rainy season. And he had all the luxuries, and at the age of 16, he got him married. Although he was not even interested in marriage. Some people think that he was very interested in sexual things and all that, which is not true. He was not interested in any of those things. But he remained like that till he became age 29. And it is because he wanted to give up his princely life after seeing the old person, the sick person and the dead person and all that. He produced a child so that he will not leave the wife alone. And that is how he went away. He was not interested in sexual relationship. He was, even in his previous life, he had given up going after sexual things. So, somehow, his whole aim was to gain freedom from these realities of life, that every person grows old, falls sick and dies. Now today people, they celebrate birthdays. So birth is something to be happy about. But they don't realize that birth is the beginning and death is the end of this thing called life. So if these are the 2 ends of the same stick, and therefore he saw that this existence itself is not something to be happy about. And ultimately he found the way out. But how did he find the way out? He realized that existence itself was a wrong concept. Because there is no such thing as existence. Existence is a static concept in a dynamic reality. That means existence means it is not changing. But life is the process of change. From the time you are born, you are changing till you grow old and die. So that is not an existence. That is a change that is going on. And when you understand that you are not really existing, then you cannot be talking about a death. If there is no existence, there cannot be a death. So by understanding that, he was awakened from the dream of existence. That is why he's called the awakened one. And he taught others how to gain freedom from this delusion of existence. That was his method. So, the idea of suffering is really, I would use the word, the insecurity of life. It is the insecurity of life. People are insecure because you don't know at what moment you are going to die. Any moment you can die. You cannot predict the moment of death. And you cannot avoid death. And you don't want to die, but you have to die. So that is the insecurity of life.
No choice. Then after that, the Buddha found out that dukkha, samudaya, nirodha, and magga.
Yeah.
So dukkha, that means insecurity. Then how about the samudaya? Samudaya, they translated as what?
No, these are the four realities of life. These are Arya Satya. Their Satya is really not just the truth. It is a reality which is supernormal. Supernormal because only people who have risen to a higher level, who can become aware of these four realities of life. The normal person is aware of the first two realities. One is the reality of insecurity. The second is the cause of insecurity. That is the normal Dhamma. But the ending of this insecurity and the way leading to the end of insecurity is the real Abhidharma, the higher level. So the end of this insecurity is Nirvana. And the way to Nirvana is the Noble Eightfold Path or the Supernormal Eightfold Way.
So, Bhante, can you list down the what? Because normally those translated available in all the Buddhist books mentioned about samadhi as right view, right understanding, and right thoughts. So, can Bhante explain about your the Eight Noble Path?
Well, I have a different translation for these things. I don't say right. This is not a matter of right and wrong. It is Samma. The word Samma, if you look in the dictionary, which is the Pali dictionary and even in the Sanskrit dictionary, the Sanskrit term is Samyak. and the Pali is Samma. But these words mean harmony. So the word Samma and Samyak really refers to harmony. And so this is why I translate Samma Ditti as the harmonious perspective. Ditti is not just a view or even, I don't even call it understanding, it's a perspective. Perspective means it is a different way of looking at things. Perspective, it is like taking a picture with a camera. Now the picture that comes out depends on the way you hold the camera. So if you want to take a picture of this hall, if you turn it this way, what you get is different from what you get when you turn it in the other direction. So everything depends on the perspective. So this is why this is the harmonious perspective. Now this harmony, to explain this, the Buddha used the story of the blind man and the elephant. You see, each blind man was shown a different part of the elephant and described the elephant in many different ways. But the Buddha is able to see all those things from all points of view and does not come in conflict with any one of those people. So in the same way, different philosophers may be coming out with different ideas, but the Buddha remains silent, doesn't disagree with that or agree with that, because the Buddha is aware of everything. This is why the Buddha said, when someone came and asked, "What is your view?" The Buddha said, "My view is that I do not come in conflict with anyone in the world." That is the harmonious perspective. So, that harmonious perspective is the Samma Ditti. And with that Samma Ditti comes what are called the Four Noble Truths, which I call the supernormal realities. This is the reality that one sees from a supernormal point of view. And that is the insecurity, the cause of the insecurity, and the end of insecurity and the way leading to the end of insecurity. So then, once you have understood that, you see that the insecurity is really coming from an emotional state. Tanha is an emotional state, not just as usually translated, it is not just craving, it is the emotional reaction to Vedana. Tanha comes from Vedana. Vedana is the feeling that is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feeling. It is the reaction to this which is tanha, which is the emotional reaction. So the ending of this insecurity is really the freedom from this emotional reaction. So the freedom from emotional reaction is a state of tranquility of mind which can never be disturbed. That tranquility becomes the goal. The tranquility becomes the goal. And that goal of tranquility is to be held in your imagination. That tranquility held in imagination is the Samma Sankappa. Samma Ditti is followed by Samma Sankappa. Sankappa is really the imagination. So whenever we have to understand that all human beings, now the modern psychologists are aware of this, that all human beings are like goal-seeking machines. We are all the time seeking goals. Even when you get up from this chair, you have a goal which is to stand up. That is your goal. And even to get out of this room, you have to have a goal which is to get out of the room. You see, our behavior is always started by a goal. And so, we, in this, what is called the supernormal eightfold way, that also starts with a goal. And this is why the Samma Sankappa is called goal orientation. And so, the goal becomes Nibbana. Nibbana is the goal. Ending of suffering. Ending of the insecurity of life. And once that becomes the goal, which is coming in the form of tranquility of mind, and that leads to Samma Vacha, Samma Kammanta, Samma Ajiva. Now that is when your mind is turned in the proper direction, then you begin to behave in the proper way. Which means you begin to speak in the right way, act in the right way, and live in the right way. So up to that point is what is called the first step, which is to enter the stream, Sotapanna. So a Sotapanna, one who has entered the stream, is the person who has come down the path in 5 steps. Samma Ditti, Samma Sankappa, Samma Vacha, Samma Kammanta, Samma Ajiva. Up to that point is the 5 steps. And that is also seen as breaking 3 fetters. Sakkayaditti, Vicikiccha and Silabbata Paramasa. So Sakkaya Ditthi is simply to personalize. Yeah, I call it the personality perspective. You are personalizing your emotions. By personalizing the emotion, you are encouraging the emotion. Here we are trying to get rid of the emotion. That is, you are discarding the emotion. So, the personalizing is given up. And Vichikiccha is where your mind is turning in two different directions. Now you have given up going after sensual pleasures and emotions. So, because your goal has been tranquility of mind. So, Vichikiccha disappears with that. And then comes Silabbata Paramasa. Silabbata Paramasa really refers to the Sila and the Bata. Sila means to avoid bad behavior. Bata means to practice good behavior. Paramasa means, para means foreign. Amasa means to receive, accept. You are not accepting this behavior because other people want you to behave. You are behaving because you want to behave. Because not to satisfy other people. So, that is not Silabbata Paramasa. So, it's very important to understand that this is called autonomous behavior or autonomous morality instead of heteronomous morality. Heteronomous morality is Silabbata Paramasa. Instead of behaving to satisfy other people, you are behaving in the proper way because you realize the need for it. But then from there on comes Samma Vayama, which is how to gain control over your emotion. There are 4 parts to it. Samvara, Pahana, Bhavana, Anurakkana. So, to practice those 4 parts is Samma Vayama. That is normally called right action or something like that.
Effort.
Huh?
Effort.
Right? What?
Effort.
Right effort, yeah. It's not right effort, it is, I call it harmonious practice. The harmonious practice, which has these 4 parts. Samvara, Pahana, Bhavana, Anurakkana. Samvara means to guard your senses. To avoiding these emotions arousing, avoiding the emotional arousal. Because the emotions are aroused when your attention is on what you see, hear, smell, taste, touch. So you are withdrawing your attention from those things. That is the Indriya Sambara. And then Prahana is to get rid of ideas coming in your memory. You are withdrawing your attention from the memories and your imagination of the future. So, past and future given up. And the present is given up with the first one. Then the second one, you give up the past and the future. So you take your attention away from these perceptual images and memory images. And then you begin to practice Samara Pahana Bhavana. Bhavana is really introspection, directing your mind inwards. And that is Kayanupassana, Vedananupassana, Chittanupassana, and Dhammanupassana. Kayanupassana is becoming aware of the body. Vedananupassana is becoming aware of how you feel in the body, whether you feel comfortable or uncomfortable or neutral. Chittanupassana refers to your emotional state. Are you lustful, or whether you are angry, or whether you are frightened, or whether you are worried? All that comes as Chittanupassana, becoming aware of that. And Dhammanupassana refers to the thoughts in your mind. Dhamma refers to the thoughts. That's the cognitive part. What are thoughts in your mind that really arouses the emotion? So once you are aware of that, that is the Satipatthana, which is the real bhavana or meditation. And that bhavana has to be maintained throughout the waking life, not just 20 minutes in the evening and 20 minutes in the morning. It has to be done throughout the waking life, standing, sitting, lying down. And then that is the anurakana. Anurakana means preservation. You are preserving that purity of mind. When that is done, the Satipatthana is properly established. That is the seventh step. And when the Satipatthana is established, from there comes the Bojjhangas. Sati, Dhamma Vichaya, Virya, Piti, Pasthadhi, Samadhi and Upekka. So it is when the Sati turns into the Bojjhangas, the end is Samadhi. And from Samadhi comes Upekka. And it is through Upekka that you begin to become fully aware of what are called the Panchakhandha. It is by becoming aware of the Panchakhanda, or I call it the five constituents of perception. The Panchakhanda is not just five aggregates, it is the five constituents of the process of perception. And by becoming aware of that, you awaken from the dream of existence. That awakening from the dream of existence is becoming a Buddha or an awakened one. So that is the meaning of the supernormal eightfold way. Is normally called the normal eightfold path. Now it's almost 11 o'clock. Yeah?
Bhante, just a short question. You see, Bhante, you mentioned the 8th step in this supernormal eightfold way is samadhi. But if we listen to what you have said, samadhi doesn't lead to awakening. We still have to understand upekkha that leads to awakening. So, like, it looks as though upekkha is the ninth step. Samadhi only puts you in a position ready for you to make the paradigm shift, but it does not awaken you at that step, isn't it? I just want your opinion on that.
No, that is true. Now, if you go to the sutras, you will begin to understand that the noble, what are called the noble eightfold path or supernormal eightfold way is only the magga. Magga means the way. But there is also a thing called the phala. Phala is the consequence or the result of this magga. And there comes panya, vimukti and nibbana. Panya, vimukti, nibbana comes after the samadhi. That is the consequence of the path. So the path goes up to samadhi, and from samadhi comes panya, vimukti and nibbana. That is the result of it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, is there any other? If not, we just stop here. Then we continue another day. We stop here. Yeah. So we share merits.
End up, huh?
Yeah.
So let us share the merits with all neighbors and all people by reciting Idam me ñātīnam hotu.
Idam me ñātīnam hotu, sukhita hontu ñātayo. Idam me ñātīnam hotu, sukhita hontu ñātayo. Idam me ñātīnam hotu, sukhita hontu ñātayo. Ita vata ca ambehi, sampadam punya sampadam. Sabbe deva, sabbe sattva, sabbe bhuta anumodantu, sabba sampatti siddhya.
May through the power of all these merits, may every one of you be able to gain freedom from all sufferings of samsara and attain the highest and most supreme bliss of nirvana.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.